Mr. Ambassador, thanks a lot for the interview, and we would like to really clarify where we are going with the Russian, Ukrainian, German, French talks with Normandy Forum, what would happen next, because I think there is a level of fatigue from the general public and there is less understanding than now. But when we know that the German Chancellor Merkel, since the last months, has the chance to talk to most of the participants, to President Poroshenko, to the President Putin. She has met the French president. So really, what's new, and we're also curious, how does Berlin sees the difference in the position of Moscow and Kiev, where the things are not matching?
Well, what you're asking is the million-dollar question. Yeah, we all have, I think we have a goal in common, but the way to reach this goal is not clear, because it is quite apparent by now, as you say, after 3 years, that there are very divergent opinions on what the actual how to achieve the goal and what the content and kind of the detail of the agreements that exist are. So this is in a permanent process, and part of the value of the process is that we at all have a basis, a written basis for the discussions, and that there is discussion. Imagine a situation where we did not have a basis of agreed principles and where we did not have formats to discuss. It's not worthless to reiterate what the basis is, because we of course know that this basis is under controversial discussion, in particular here. But as for what is required next, our position and the French position is very clear, and it coincides with the Ukrainian position for that matter. It is that, first of all, we need to improve the security situation. We need to have a sustained ceasefire, the moving away of heavy weapons, and thereby a solid basis of no more fighting, on which then one can base further steps in the implementation of the Minsk agreements.
But still, what, for instance, are the demands of the Russian side? If we speak beside the security, which is very clear.
But broadly speaking, we have two packages of the Minsk agreement: the security-related issues and the political issues. And this, the main debate is about which elements of which package come at what time.
As, for instance, I'll add to that, of course, besides the security, there are these issues about, who controls the border, when there are the elections. But these are discussions which are lasting for the last 2 years, all about that. So really, what are discussed now? For instance, if Ms. Merkel meets, both presidents, what issues are raised?
All right. I mean, for instance, if we speak about security, there is the kind of abstract level of maintaining ceasefire. Then we have the disengagement of, or the moving away of heavy weapons. Then we have the issue of disengagement zones. There's the idea, and it would be really good if there could be disengagement zones, in particular where people cross the line of contact, yeah? And where to have them and how to implement them. One big issue regarding these disengagement zones is the clearing of mines, for instance. Then we have another set of issues that have to do with SMM, the access of SMM to all parts which lie within its mandate, the entire territory of Ukraine, their security.
So what you more or less, what we know from the recent Normandy meeting, of course not with the leaders themselves, that there was a talks about kind of a roadmap. So really, is there existing the agreed roadmap by 4 sides which could be applicable?
No, we don't have an agreed roadmap. There's a draft, but there's a lot of disagreement on the content of the roadmap.
If we go broader, because it's a larger issue, at any level, in the process, we're not speaking exactly about Minsk. Are we talking about the kind of the temporary administration, which should be in the so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic, and the possibility that they would be run by the personalities which would be agreed by the Ukrainians and the Russians? As a temporary administration is part of the solution of any conflict, often.
Temporary administration is not a main feature of the Minsk agreements. Yeah. The Minsk agreements contain provisions about the withdrawal of foreign troops, control over the border, local elections which are supposed to take place, but transitional administration is not really a main feature of this. I think it makes good sense to concentrate on the matters that are in principle agreed and how to implement them. And if you introduce new elements into the discussion, the effect is likely to be that there's additional disagreement over these things. Yeah?
And how do you see then these kind of ideas about the parallel tracks? We knew, and there is no secret, that, for instance, there was a parallel track with the US Undersecretary Victoria Nuland and Vladislav Surkov. They were meeting, and also we know that there is no person now which is appointed for this role in the US, but there would be that person. So how do you see this kind of the parallel tracks, and how the Germany sees, and what we can hope with that?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, parallel tracks in negotiations are a bad idea, because they get exploited by the one or other side and to play the interlocutors against each other. So if we have, on the other hand, parallel discussions, everybody discusses with everybody in international diplomacy. And so what is key is that there is close agreement and close coordination between, in this particular case, the United States and Germany and France in the Normandy format. And we are very closely discussing and cooperating, have been during the previous US administration, and we are also speaking intensively with the new US administration.
Do we see that the US would be involved to the Normandy Forum?
I think at this point there are no indications that the United States want to become a full participant in the Normandy format. Imagine that would mean that if there's a top-level meeting, we would need the presence of President Trump. Yeah? President Trump has a lot of other things he needs to take care of and wants to take care of. So it's not quite clear whether, by including President Trump, maybe we create an obstacle for more frequent meetings at the top level. So this is one of the issues which need to be carefully considered, and which maybe, I don't know, maybe lead to it that the Americans still at this point in time, also under the new administration, say they are comfortable with the way things are set up today.
But there is not really the secret that the Russian President Putin really, and there are others, it's not just the talks, that the US for Russia is more or less the key guarantee for reaching the agreement, and that would be the thing that the Russians wanted to talk to the US.
I guess you're right, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they would want the United States in the Normandy format. Yeah.
So coming back to the very concrete things which are in Minsk, can we speak about any kind of time framework? Where we can expect any kind of the elections in Donbass, as when we started, and I remember very well, we had this discussion that it should take place by the end of 2015.
Unfortunately not, no, because, I mean, you are right in pointing out that the timelines have expired, and I think experience shows we were right not to set new time limits, because as is in particular the Ukrainian side keeps pointing out rightly, today we don't have any kind of prerequisites in place for elections.
President Poroshenko had mentioned, and it wasn't just him, the idea of the peacekeeping mission.
And any kind of initiative to make even this civilian monitoring mission more robust meets obstacles. So a peacekeeping mission of, for instance, the United Nations is a different quality. But there's one prerequisite which they have in common, the civilian and so, that is also a peacekeeping mission of the United Nations requires a real ceasefire which works and the agreement of all those who can kind of put this peacekeeping mission in danger.
If you speak that the peacekeeping mission is way too complex, maybe you can come back to any other creative ideas on the transitional administration or anything that, because I mean, like, just to see it clearly that there would be some guarantees of security.
I think as far as Germany and France are concerned, we would be happy to consider any original and at the same time realistic idea. Only you and I think we agree that 3 years we have been running into obstacles. And so I think we have the kind of amount of fresh ideas that may still be around and be at the same time realistic is fairly limited.
Is the Ukrainian government coming up anytime with some fresh and new ideas?
Well, yes, there are fresh ideas, but them being fresh is not sufficient. They also have to be realistic, or they need to be, one needs to see a chance to put them into action.
There is some kind of the sentiment in the society that in the end, of course, the West is supporting Ukraine, but it's tired. It is tired, and it would be tired of this conflict. And of course, there is the idea that this war should be over, and there should be again back the trade with Russia, and there would be in more or less that Ukraine would be enforced to make the concession. So how would you explain it to the Ukrainian population? We have this opportunity now to say why, and why the population should accept that, if they just really feel unfair about the whole, the fact that the Ukrainians should make concessions.
Well, I mean, that the situation is unfair is out of question. Of course, Ukraine is the side that is suffering from this protracted conflict. This is why we are making a diplomatic and very intensive diplomatic effort to kind of find a solution. This is why Chancellor Merkel and former French president, as well as the new French president, are eager actually to kind of engage personally in the search for a solution. And on top of that, second point, we have imposed sanctions on Russia, which kind of sees to it that Russia pays a price for the ongoing conflict. So I think if one looks at it fairly, one can say there's really a lot of kind of effort going on from the West. But that, of course, does not offer a guarantee that there will be a quick solution the way Ukraine wants it. And the second point, other point is, yes, I mean, the Minsk agreements are not 100% Ukrainian position. They lead to an end result which is the restoration of international law. But there are political provisions which are not to the liking of everyone here in this country, I know. Yeah? These provisions are the price which Ukraine pays for the restoration of international law. Yeah? Because it is not realistic to expect that we wake up one morning and Russia has decided, or the separatists have decided, that they will leave and that everything will be as before.
How do you see the impact of this discussion, which is today is more loud than before. In the Ukrainian parliament, you see pretty well-known Ukrainian politicians and the public figures who would prefer to dismiss Minsk. How that, and how do you see, how confident you are? And we see that the elections would come. All the parties have to make the, concessions to this idea. Nobody would like to look weak in front of the public.
Yeah, I can only kind of encourage everybody in Ukrainian politics to think in practical and realistic terms. Yeah? Imagine a situation without Minsk. Let's remember, 90% of the civilian casualties in this conflict date from before the Minsk package. Yeah? So you can be annoyed and frustrated about the lack of further implementation of the steps in the Minsk program. But one effect, I would argue, of the Minsk being in existence and there being an international discussion in existence is that it has kind of at least reduced the level of suffering to a certain degree. Yeah? I'm not saying there's no suffering or it's not really bad, but I think it's less terrible as it used to be in 2014. So everybody who wants to kind of scrap Minsk or wants to pass a law in parliament which draws lines in the red lines, yeah, and makes agreement in Minsk on the basis of Minsk impossible or very difficult, have to think what effect that will have. I would argue Minsk is not perfect, but I think it is pretty good if one gets it to be implemented.
There is this new dynamic with the new French president, Macron. He is pretty clear in his relations with Vladimir Putin. We are following the news. There is a new dynamic. He's more proactive than the previous president, Hollande. So really, how do you see how that could influence on the Russian-Ukrainian talks?
Well, I think one also has to be fair to President Hollande. He was also very active, and he's done quite a lot. We are very happy, I think, that we have President Macron, in particular in light of what the alternative would have been. But we will have to see whether this kind of the new person at the table leads to a new dynamic. That we don't know.